I realized that your idiotic professor didn't post the Jones handout, but still neat. But we have some stuff to talk about. I guess first of all, do you want? I'd like to talk about Saving Private Ryan. What do we make of Saving Private Ryan? Now that you've had time to process the.
I feel like it's interesting how the Brooklyn soldier who
Rival.
wasn't, I forgot his name, who wasn't very, like, obviously masculine, like he literally tried to quit partway through, how he was one of the few that actually survived. Like, I just think that's interesting, and
yeah, he kind of comes off as an asshole through the whole thing.
I mean, I kind of thought he was right, to be honest, about a lot of that. But I've been an asshole, but he was right sometimes, too.
Yeah,
It's interesting to see how the comm officer's masculinity was represented throughout the film, how he never really lived up to what their idea of masculinity is. And in the end, it actually served him negatively in the fight. He wasn't able to do and help out the rest of his squad, which kind of led to most of them getting killed explicitly. The guy who got stabbed with a knife and letting the German guy go.
Yeah.
I also thought, and then he of course had his hurrah moment of after everything is over, just shooting the guy and then being like, get over there. And he's walking across the bridge all stoic and like he did anything.
You're talking about Upham.
Yeah.
Elena.
I guess like there was like so much going on. I had a hard time understanding who survived in the end.
Ribal, the Brooklyn guy who threatened to walk away after the machine gun nest and Wade the medic got killed, and he wanted to shoot the German, and he's like walking away, and the sergeant pulls the gun and points it right in his face, and they're shouting at each other.
Okay.
That guy survived.
Okay.
And Upham, the translator, and Ryan.
Okay.
And that's it.
Okay.
I think. I don't think.
Yeah, that's all
it.
I thought.
Yeah, listen.
I kind of thought the whole thing, the translator was like very unmasculine, like especially in that battle. Like I was just thinking, like watching him, just like when he was kind of crying on the stairwell, like unable to put himself in danger to save his comrade. I'm like by this masculine standards of this time, like this guy is a complete like failure of those standards, and he manages to like survive, which I feel like is an interesting decision on the movie's part, considering like the standards of masculinity and like all that. Like he managed to survive even though he was basically just running and hiding the whole time, which actually kind of makes sense from a logical perspective that somebody doing that would survive because they're not putting themselves in as much danger. Like from the storytelling perspective, it's interesting.
Sure.
For Upham on the stairwell. I think that was kind of just another extreme example of him realizing that he wasn't really in the game of masculine soldiering. I think probably previously in his military career he kept discovering that, or other people kept reminding him of that, in just little everyday things. And that was so universally understood by different armies alike that even
the German realized
left him alone. And I think he was partly breaking down because it just was he just kind of knew again, or wanted to be a part of this thing.
Yeah, it could.
Yeah.
Did you ever hit up earlier? And then Zach, and then Wyatt?
It wasn't fully like a Deus Ex Machina with a plane showed up. I was like,
It was a little bit. I had written down Deus Ex Aeroplane.
Yeah.
Deus Ex
I was like,
Aeroplane.
okay, at least they had a solution here, but it kind of like whatever. Like obviously it's a story and it's been written and it's a narrative, so the ideas of masculinity can come in and like influence who lives and dies. What I'm like where my mind has been going in terms of like like the second one more me and we've been dealing with. It's just, man, so many people are just super unlucky.
Yeah.
Because like if it happened to like waited like a minute before, like if you hadn't like tried to grab the fuse, it would have
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it was whatever.
Yeah, I think two things. I think the men who are depicted as the most masculine were the ones that ended up dying. You got the captain, you got the sergeant, you've got the Jewish guy, you've got the paratroopers, and you can see that the Brooklyn guy, he was in a like very toxic masculinity kind of way. He was just kind of a toxic player, but he ended up surviving in a certain way. I think that was representative that different people can. And secondly, I think exploring Tom Hanks's character masculinity is really interesting. He kept his home life and his military life completely separate, and he let it bleed a couple of times, but mostly he wanted to keep it to himself. And that was how he found his joy and how he was able to tolerate what was happening around him, is by internalizing and keeping it to himself.
Wyatt and Alyssa and Sydney.
I think it was like halfway through the movie or whatever, but when they encountered that group of Germans, and then they had that fight scene with them, and there was that one survivor who they made then dig a grave. His performance from a masculine point of view was horrendously pathetic. Him breaking down, and, it's this really like just horrible display of him trying to grasp onto surviving with whatever means he can to try to sway this American audience, trying to, and very failing at singing the national anthem and so on. I thought was a really interesting perspective because it paints the enemy as this really sort of unmasculine, pathetic sort of being, and he's about to die. But if you look at the parallel between when all of the American soldiers are dying, they're breaking down, they're quite horribly mutilated, and they're crying out for their mothers and stuff. But I feel like there's, from a directing point of view, the film was like making a distinction between the enemy, and that way of dying is, not socially acceptable, or at least is like would have been perceived at the time period, contemporary with the events. Whereas somebody who's breaking down, who's horrendously mutilated, crying out for their mother, I think is probably was more relatable, like to the social conscious. So even though it's maybe not masculine, it's socially acceptable. Not to mention, the age difference. He's still a young person. Young people dying, so it's socially acceptable. So I thought that was kind of an interesting parallel.
Mm-hmm. Okay, listen, Sydney.
So this isn't about the movie, but do you know when you're getting the paper instructions out?
Yeah, when somebody reminds me in class, and I think we're doing it. I'll try to get that up this afternoon. Sorry, Sydney.
Yeah, more on Tom Hanks' character. I think something that really stuck with me was when his wall kind of came down and he started saying oh, I was a school teacher, and one of the quotes I wrote down, every man I kill, the further away from home I feel, and just kind of opening up to all the guys with that. And then I feel like maybe he kind of done it in a way, because I feel like that was the time when the one guy was going to shoot the guy from Brooklyn. Maybe he let the wall down to bring everyone back together. Look, we all don't want, it's not a situation we're all happy about. We all have lives outside of this, but we can't all just not shoot each other at least.
Okay. Anything else on that? Well, yeah, go ahead.
It was interesting that the framing device was Private Ryan's memories, even though he was only there for the last little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you can't, neither Ribble nor Upham would be a good framer for that story. And nobody else survives,
Because
so.
I wasn't sure what it was until, I accidentally spoiled that. I don't even do, but at the start I was like, is that Tom Hanks in old man makeup? But he's not old.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, it was really interesting how they ended it with him resolving the whole question of was he worth it by breaking down to his wife and being tell me I was a good man.
That's a really interesting scene because he's basically asking his wife to validate his masculinity, and she does. and that's supposed to resolve the whole thing. You know? But listen,
I also think it's interesting how like the old man, like if the old man was always Private Ryan, then like he wouldn't have known about like the beach landing. He wouldn't have known like
no.
any of that stuff because Private Ryan came at the very end.
Well, I
So
don't
it's
think the
interesting
movie was
funny-
supposed to be his memories. I think it was just a flashback to the story of how all these people died.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of common for that to be like a memory flashback. So it's just interesting that like
Yeah, it's an impossible memory.
yeah, and like with the story as a whole, like excluding the kind of like almost like prologue and epilogue, Private Ryan is not actually in it all that much. Just like
No.
the main characters are definitely the captain, and then he just like, and like the main character title is almost like passed over to Private Ryan after the captain dies.
Kind of in the nerve.
I don't know what they could have done in the 90s, but I feel like instead of fading to an American flag, if they just like zoomed out in the entire war memorial and all the graves and just like
Yeah.
see all of that. Like, I think
I wanna-
that was more
I wanna
impactful.
point out
It's like,
something.
a flag.
The fading to the flag is and I
I
don't
almost
want
expected them to start playing taps.
I don't want this to be taken in the wrong way. It's just an interesting parallel, and I don't think it's any deeper than just an interesting parallel. But at the end of the Nazi propaganda film Hitler Youth Quecks, he dies for the Nazis in fighting the communists and street fighting in Berlin. Doesn't matter, but they show all these soldiers marching towards you, and then it fades to the flag in the same way. And scholars of Nazi film have said over and over again the Nazis love to have the dead person fade into the flag to show that they died for their country and they are one with the nation and they sacrifice them. They've joined the nation heaven or whatever it is, sort of implying it. And I think this is the same move. Now, it doesn't equate America with the Nazis or even the ideologies are different, etc. But it's the same move that's saying, this guy sacrificed himself for the nation and now he is merged with the nation. He is one with the flag. He lives on forever in the flag, billowing in the wind.
Well, yeah, that is one thing about. I think it's probably a symptom of it being a World War II movie as opposed to the World War I movies, which we had been watching, is that their masculinity isn't pointless. It all in most of the World War I movies, at least especially Gallipoli and All Quiet on the Western Front, all of it's at the end, all of it's kind of pointless. Everyone's dead. There's not any happy ending. Whereas this, they all die, but anytime anyone dies, it feels like it's driving forward,
Towards
the purpose
towards
of
the
everything.
goal.
Yeah.
Eric.
Thanks, Paul. You know how they talk about, or they mention the altar of freedom?
Yes, that's from the Lincoln letter.
Yeah. I think there's I don't know, this is my own visualization. I think there is a hall that surrounds that altar as well. I think this movie is kind of one branch of that, and a couple other films as well. We Were Soldiers, I don't know, Full Metal Jacket. This movie is, I think it's about, it's more about men working together. It's even when they're in combat, it sounds like they're going to work.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Hold on to that thought. I'll come back to that. Kelly.
It's probably just because I'm Canadian, but the idea of a man who had passed away in war being subsumed into a flag and kind of living up high is a very strange idea to me, because even though it's more World War I thing, poppies get so heavily associated with Remembrance Day and stuff in Canada, so I feel like the way I think of soldiers is living on more as one with
The soil.
nature and that sense. So I don't know. I just don't know. Wow, I didn't consider that part because it didn't cross my mind. But
Yeah.
it's just
It's
weird.
very American to associate war veterans and stuff with the country itself. We're big nationalists over here.
I don't think
Why?
Canadians aren't, but.
Yeah, I think that message is like quite abundantly clear, and like, I mean, I can't help thinking about Upham's character and the fact that he obviously is, towards the end, like visually quite a coward, as what like standards would, you know, if you're thinking about that, why isn't he coming to, you know, his comrades' rescue? Why isn't he stepping in? But on other parallels, I'm kind of thinking like, well, does he have to? You know, it's not his war. He didn't ask to be there, and it's like, he is kind of maybe being a dick by not helping them, but at the same point, it's, you know, I kind of get that. And then, but then trying to therefore associate it with, well, this is the country's cause, does really draw into the fact and make it poignant. If you don't do those things, you are even more of a coward, you're even unmasculine, because not only are these, I guess, stereotypes or provisions set up to make you manly, but they're also furthering that national identity too, that these are the men that the nation are built on, and so on and so forth. I also thought, like, the effects that Steven Spielberg had on the film, like introducing Ryan in the field just really abruptly, I thought was like quite interesting, because just out of nowhere, we didn't know where he was going to come into, and I thought that was kind of fun. And also like several moments where there's just suspense, like when they were going to shoot each other or shoot the German, and it just, you know, somebody pulls the trigger. I thought that was a good like film move too, because it really did have you kind of on the edge of your seat.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, I think Steven Spielberg is a brilliant filmmaker in making visuals and telling stories, but I think that he has a very decided penchant for moral black and white, beating you over the head with the moral message, schlock, if you will. And I hate to say that, because I mean, in so many ways, Schindler's List is an amazing movie, but I feel like right at the end he just goes total schlock. And you know, Saving Private Ryan is in a lot of ways an awesome, amazing movie, and then right at the end he sort of goes total schlock.
Yeah, like, I like that ending scene could have just been like, we could have just returned to the cemetery and kind of faded out. And I don't think anyone would have been like, dang, I really wish I would have known how old Private Ryan felt about the whole situation.
Yeah. Let me go back to something Jackson and Eric were sort of alluding to, which is, I mean, how does the mission feature into what these guys think they're doing, or how does the nation, or you know, Eric said they're kind of going to work in a sense, and they have a lot of conversations about what would make this all worthwhile, right? You know, and I mean, the more frivolous are, if Private Ryan invents a better light bulb, you know, longer lasting light bulb, it'll be worthwhile. But did you have any thoughts on, because I think there's something really important going on there with them thinking about the higher mission goal, not their own heroism. And in fact, there's sort of a fatalism. All of them sort of seem to think they're going to die at any minute, but they focus on the goal, right? I mean, and you have that long conversation about when they first start out about, you know, complaining about missions and whatever, and oh, you don't do that and whatever, and then later, how many guys have died under my command, and is it worth it? Is, you know, saving more lives, etc. And you know, they keep coming back to this, and you know, Private Ryan's mother, is she worth more than my mother? You know.
I think that's interesting that you bring up, because in World War, because we talked about how in World War I, it was the death of heroism and realizing that you're just a cog in the machine and that your actions don't matter. But in this movie, in Saving Private Ryan, it's like, even if we are just a cogs in the machine, we contribute to the greater whole and to the benefit, and to specifically one person's benefit, and he will come out of this a hero. Yeah, just equating that their own abilities are bringing the nation up.
Well, and I think one thing that was really different about the two wars is that, like, I think most people understood why the World War II was happening, and like could point to a clear reason. And for different people, it might have been different clear reasons. Like for some people, they're like, yeah, we really need to help with, like, we have to stop the Holocaust, and some people are like, we have to get Japan back for bombing. But there's clear reasons as to why we're in the war. There's clear reasons as to why the European people are in the war. Like, there's a clear reason. Whereas a big theme in the World War I movies was them just being like, why are we here? Like, there's no, like, we're just at war.
One country offended.
We're at war because we're at war,
Yeah.
was kind of the theme. Whereas this, it's like, there's always like, because the goal, so to speak, is to win the war, but they're given this small assignment, so their goal is like seems kind of, I don't know, ancillary to like the main goal of winning the war. What does getting this one person and sending him home have to do? And I think it's interesting, like their conversations, the like goals they set for him is like he needs to save more lives that are like lost by this war essentially, or like he needs to create good. And then there's the one scene like early on when they're visiting the plane crash where they're literally like, this was a big risk that we took taking this route or whatever to try and protect this one general, and now everyone's dead and it was not worth it. This general's life was not worth it.
Yeah.
That's like decidedly the case.
Yeah.
And so but then once we get to meet Private Ryan, it's really interesting because like the first inkling that it's going to be worth it is that when he hears that his brothers are dead, he doesn't start breakdown crying like the false Private Ryan. Our fake Private Ryan, he hears his brothers are dead and he's immediately like snivering and whimpering.
Yeah.
And it's a little different because he's like, oh my god, my 8-year-old brother's died.
Yeah.
But like he stays like cool and masculine, and then he like the other one's like, yes, take me home, and this Private Ryan's like, no, I'm not leaving my brothers, my new brothers.
Right, there's definitely a sense that he earned something from that troop, and even from Rival, because they show Rival looking at Ryan after that. You know, Rival's the Brooklyn, jerk. They show him looking and sort of like, oh, okay, this guy's not, maybe this guy's worth it or something. Kylie would want.
I mean, obviously, like, both wars were horrific, and like the mechanization of war like just created like so much like just awful. But comparing World War II, the fact that like it is war in motion, and it's more similar to wars that it came before it, and like people can actively do stuff and like feel like they're being heroic and like participate instead of just like hiding, because that's the only thing they can do. And the fact that like created a different sense of like heroism, but of like in like cultural memory, and it also created a different sense of the war, and then obviously giving people enemies.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one thing that's you guys have sort of alluded to a couple times here is that World War II really was a war of motion. So there really was a sense that you were accomplishing something. I mean, they landed at the beach and they took the beach and they moved inland, right? And so there was a sense that the mission was accomplishing something. And whereas in World War I, you were just in those trenches for 4 years and nothing changed. It was just death and death and death and nothing changed. Why are you doing this? There's no obvious reason, because it doesn't change anything whether you live or die. And whether thousands live or die, it doesn't change where the trenches are. But in World War II, it's like, oh yeah, if we, a few more die, we get more, closer to the objective, or et cetera. Wyatt,
I think too, like media and everything. I mean, they've had, at this point, quite a big gap between the First World War and to learn what we did wrong there, what we can do better, and between the Second. And I mean, the radio really kicks off, even early television and stuff. And now, propaganda ministries and stuff too. So they're able to like make a cause even if there's kind of an absence of one. And I think too, the fact that, Germany in the First World War was definitely an aggressor, but it wasn't quite as much, it is kind of the fault of all of the heads of state, right? But during the Second World War, Hitler was quite obviously the baddie. Like there was no, way around that. And so painting him in a different picture, I don't think would have been very easy, sympathetic towards Nazis, even though there was that. But but also I think there's always justification, and I'm kind of curious, like the justification that they in that group set for themselves to save Private Ryan, whether or not they were just telling themselves that to just get on with the job, or if they actually believed that, that was something that they actually adopted.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say similar, but I mean, having propaganda, like World War I certainly it was a big accident in general.
Well, no, in World War I, they were nailing kittens to the church doors in Belgium, crucifying kittens. What was the line she used?
World War II was on both sides, but do get someone.
Mm-hmm.
Like I know from my great grandpa, like he signed up at like 17 and went from 49 to 45. He was like, I don't want bachelor becoming here.
Yeah.
That's the reason.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we should come back to the idea of propaganda, because the Gubar reading obviously has propaganda in it. But